Well, that is there as a teaser. If you're interested, it's a great commentary on every Sunday's reflections that I often use a bit to kind of spark the mind. So a few years ago, this would be 2006 to be exact, which actually seems like an eternity ago now, I was asked to do some workshops at the National Conference of the American Baptist Convention, which I assumed was progressive, liberal, open-minded because of my experience in an American Baptist church in Milwaukee that I joined, Underwood Baptist. I was a new member there. It was a 1.5-hour workshop to focus on full marriage equality, and the other was to focus on homeless, runaway, throwaway youth, especially LGBTQA youth who are at risk. Back then, I think we just said LGBTQ. I'm not even sure we had the Q. But things change. Assuming that most of the folks there were open-minded and pretty progressive, I asked the whole gathering, as I was introduced, of about 2,500 individuals, I said, hey, does everybody know it's Ascension Day today? The only person I knew there was Jamie Washam, who was the pastor of the church that I attended, and a few members from Underwood that were in attendance that happened to be in Milwaukee. And then I said, does anybody really believe in the ascension anymore as progressive people of faith? Ooh. Well, there were a few voices out of the 2,500 people that piped up and said, I believe in the ascension. Yeah, me too. I was actually causing quite a stir. Others were kind of looking around nervously at each other, like they knew something that everybody else didn't know about them. And I suspect they were thinking for me, that is incredibly awkward. And it was. So actually, I still didn't get it, right? So I said, so what do you think happened? Did Jesus ascend up past the moon, wave at Saturn and Mars, and then suddenly kind of turn around and disappear and jot off into the sky like some sort of Star Wars or Star Trek? Well, at this point, one of the preachers in the group raised their hand and said in all sincerity, look, whoever you are, 2,500 people. It says in the Apostles' Creed that the ascension happened, and that's what I believe. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And then I said, well, that was really written by a bunch of old white European men. And from that point on, it was challenging. And it was actually all downhill from there. So I quickly became designated the annual meeting heretic. But, by the way, I was in the process of having my ordination recognized by the United Church of Christ, so I was in good company eventually. So in the middle of my awkward silence, I said, my bad, it's still Ascension Day. I respect all of your individual opinions, and if anybody wants to talk in private with me, feel free. Well, to say the least, my 2 workshops were the most attended workshops. They had to move the workshops out of the small rooms they had them in and into the bigger hall. And there were over 100 people that talked to me that day, sometimes in the bathroom stall, sometimes in dark hallway corners of the convention center, some just handing me a scrap of paper, all stating in one fashion or another, I couldn't say this out loud, but I've always wondered, and you've expressed a sentiment and a question that I have had about the ascension and other key doctrines of the church. I just haven't had a safe place to share my questions or my doubts. Or, I don't want to be considered a heretic like you, and I don't want to lose my position in church leadership. Gandhi said, persistent questioning and healthy inquisitiveness are the first requisite for acquiring learning of any kind. It kind of made me wonder, a few weeks ago I talked about shame. I wondered how many individuals in that room were holding on to shame because they felt shamed by their questions, their doubts, their anxieties, their fears, because they had to toe the party line. In Russian Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox theology, the ascension that we're talking about today is interpreted as the culmination of the mystery of the incarnation. Everybody get that? The culmination of the mystery of the incarnation. The incarnation, we know, takes us way back to Christmas. It's God, we are told, coming to earth in the body of Jesus. Church, religious scholars, theologians, those of us who move in the ivory towers, have discussed and argued ad nauseum just how divine Jesus was. My Orthodox conservative Christian seminary stated that Jesus was fully God and fully human. And the only time his fully godness and his fully humanness separated was on the cross, when we know God can't die, so God exited stage right when Jesus was on the cross, and only the human Jesus died. So just how divine was Jesus? How human was Jesus? 50-50, 25-75, 90-10. The challenge is, and we talked about this a little bit this morning in our class, Ken Wells, was holy and unholy wars have been fought over just this point. And at that American Baptist convention that day, I might have potentially incited a mini war of our own. If not a public one, I think a private one in the hearts and the souls and the minds of those in attendance. So the early church, after many arguments and much blood being shed, about 420 years after this moment when Jesus ascended, they defined Jesus' divinity and humanity in this way. Two natures, inconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, inseparably. I'm not even sure inconfusedly is a word. But it might have been back in 451 AD. So that was the definition of the Council of Chalcedon. It took 450 years to get to that point. Now, I concur with one of my favorite authors and theologians by the name of Karen Armstrong, and she said this: Jesus did not spend a great deal of time discoursing about the Trinity or about original sin or about incarnation, which have preoccupied later Christians. He went around doing good and being compassionate. I think Karen makes an excellent point. In fact, I would push it a little bit further. Jesus didn't seem to care about what percentage of human or divine he was. He didn't even define or mention any sort of Trinity. He didn't mention any concept of original sin. And he didn't, by the way, say anything about LGBTQIA issues. Jesus did not develop one single doctrine. It was all humans that developed those doctrines after Jesus ascended. Because I think all of that would have been a great distraction from what Jesus was really here to do and be, which Karen says is Jesus went around doing good and being compassionate. My friends, it is so much easier to talk the talk about God wherever you are at than it is to walk the walk about God. I attempt to live by this Oliver Goldsmith plaque that I once found, and it says this: you can preach a better sermon with your life than with your lips. That's why I'm convinced it really doesn't necessarily do a lot of good for me to sit in my office and pontificate. I'd rather pontificate out in coffee shops. But what does best for me and best for you, for us, is to be outside these walls, walking the walk, wherever that walk takes me. Of course, this is Jackson on a couch at Fillmore Coffee in one of his striking poses. And this is our community out on the streets with our Let's Be Better Humans bus at the Capitol March for Life. And here are some of us outside ICE the week before last, sharing in a Jericho moment as we walked around the ICE building 7 times, like Joshua and the Hebrew people walked around the city of Jericho, or standing with the Black Mothers yesterday outside the Capitol, a Mother's Day prayer march to support Black mothers. These are really important, crucial ways that we walk the talk rather than just talking the talk. But I'd like you to take a break right in the middle of the message today. And Sean, who I think is running the projector back there, is going to project some culturally specific images of the ascension, I'd like you to just, in silence, look at these images and see what they say to you. So the first one is from a Canadian artist. The second one is from a British artist, Valerie Kelly. Third one is a presentation of the Ascension from Zaire. This one is Jesus Mafa from the Cameroon. This one is indigenous people from our own country, and it's called Tribal Ascension. And then there is this beautiful modern art by George Gree. And finally, the famous Salvador Dali of Spain from his memorable perspective. What do those images say to you? I know we went through those quickly. What do they say? Anybody? All of the faces of Jesus have compassion. Great reflection. Thank you for noticing that. Anybody else? Rebirth? Oh yeah, they show rebirth in many, many ways. Yes. Different cultures, different peoples. Margaret? Yeah, they all showed an energy bigger than any one of us. No fear of death. Right, no fear of death. I think those are beautiful, beautiful images, and it crosses the globe. It's a very unusual, this story of the Ascension. It's not just limited to us. It's global. And I believe there's kind of a middle way between either dismissing it blindly or blindly affirming this event that happened 2,000 years ago. Because oftentimes our worldview fails when it comes to our 21st century knowledge and thinking. The challenge, for me at least, is to hold both of these perspectives in tension. The perspective that I shared with the American Baptist folks, the skeptic, but also the tradition that is deep within communities of faith that gives us this understanding, like Margaret shared, about the energy of Jesus in the world. So possibly, could Jesus have had some sort of energetic departure from this earth? If we believe in a God of miracles, certainly. But did it really have to be that way? Could it have been the disciples' imagination? For me, this story and the whole life of Jesus, in essence, speaks to my mystical nature, or to the mystical nature within all of us. Our mystical or spiritual nature is why we are here. We are here because we are people who seek truth, a truth of life beyond our ordinary senses. I don't think anybody here would say that God is not beyond your ordinary senses. God is far beyond that which is ordinary. Several people this week, oddly enough, have told me that they've been seeking and praying some sort of mystical, divine experience with God so that they understand that God exists and that God is present. I believe opportunities to connect with the divine, to have experiences of the divine, surround us each and every day, but we fail to be aware or to be present enough to actually recognize them. We fail to live in the spirit where we can experience God in our everyday, normal lives. This is a wonderful quote by Kramaric that says, "Portals of divinity are everywhere. I believe that children may enter these divine portals easier because they are seeking for answers in the purest, and I would add simplest, way." I think one story around the Ascension could be this was a divine portal, and that we're all seeking a divine portal for our own lives. And Jesus is calling us also, I think, through this story to find our own divine portal. And the one thing that Jesus did say, and often people use this to reference the Trinity, which I think is a wrong understanding. He said, I and the divine parent are one. And in the Message translation, it says, we are one in heart and we are one in mind. That was Jesus' ultimate goal in life. In his talking and his walking was to be one with God in heart and in mind. Stephen Davis of Claremont School of Theology puts it this way: I do not believe that in the ascension of Jesus that he went up, kept going until he achieved an escaping velocity from the earth, and then kept moving until he got to heaven, wherever heaven is, as if heaven were located somewhere in space. The ascension of Jesus was primarily a change of state rather than a change of location. Right now, we all need a change of state. I need a change of state. You need a change of state. We need to find ourselves in a place of transformation, transfiguration, and ascension. And by the way, one day that's all going to happen to us anyway. The way I look at this beautiful reading of the ascension is it's kind of a bookend. It's a bookend of the beginning of life and the end of life. But what really counts is what's in between life. Ascension reminds us to bring heaven to earth. Ascension reminds us to bring heaven to earth. We're in this world to bring heaven down to earth. And the divine plan is not to escape earth, but again to bring heaven to earth. It's the bookends of our own personal journey. We're born into the world, and someday we're going to be born out of this world into another. And you said you saw this as rebirth into some other spiritual existence. And in between these bookends that we call life and death, we have multiple births and rebirths. There are multiple resurrections. There are multiple mystical aha moments when God becomes real to us. There are mystical aha moments when we find that we're not just talking the talk, but we're actually walking the walk. There's those mystical aha moments when you realize that you're a part of something much bigger than just your part of the world. There's those mystical aha moments when you realize that what counts in life is not the stuff we collect, but actually the lives that we touch. And there's moments when we can say about ourselves that indeed we are filled with the divine. That indeed I, you, and God, we are one. Our purposes and our movements are one. Muji is a spiritual teacher from Jamaica, and he said this: we are both human and we are divine. Human troubles compelled the wise to discover their divine nature. In the 50 years plus that I have lived, I've become convinced of this one fact, that we are all divine beings having a human experience. Jesus' ascension, in a mystical sense, it ended his human experience as a divine being. Jesus' ascension reminds us that a life well lived is a life that counts, because the life well lived is a life that looks like the life of Jesus. So many people I know, and sometimes myself included at different points in my life, are not really living, but they're just existing. For me, that seems to be a waste of a life. Oscar Wilde, the great queer theologian, said, "To live is the rarest thing in the world, but most people just exist." I want to live. I don't want to just exist. I want this community to really live and not just exist. And I'm hoping the same for you. So as I bring this message to a close, as I wondered about an appropriate ending, which is always a challenge, because I can always have more to say than what I put down on paper. As I ponder Jesus ending his life on earth. And as I consider ascension, I thought of the Buddha, who said this: in the end, these things matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you live? And how deeply did you let go? Stare at those words and those questions for a few moments. How well did you love? How fully did you live? And how deeply did you let go? Those questions assist me and help me to look at my life at any age. Those words help me to live into the mystery of all of us as divine beings having this human journey. I pray that each of us may live into that mystery each and every single day. We're going to close the message this morning with a song we've become very familiar with. I think it speaks of the mystery of life, but it also speaks of the mystery of the life of Jesus. It's the story of the in-between time and what we as people of faith are called to be and called to do, as our lives are bookended by birth, by ascension, by our coming, and by our going. So let us please rise and join together.